When students lose trust, a nation pays the price. There is a question that has stayed with me for a long time, and the more I observe our society, the more uncomfortable the answer becomes. What happens when a young person stops believing that hard work is enough? Not because they became lazy, not because they lost ambition, but because the systems around them repeatedly send the message that effort alone cannot guarantee fairness. That question is much bigger than one examination, one protest, one government, or one political party. It goes to the heart of what holds a society together. Every nation depends on an invisible agreement between its people and its institutions. We study because we believe education will reward merit. We obey laws because we believe they will be applied fairly. We pay taxes because we believe public institutions exist to serve citizens. When those beliefs begin to weaken, the damage is not immediately visible, but it spreads quietly through millions of minds. Today, I want to talk about the events surrounding the NEET controversy and the protests that followed, not to repeat slogans or to tell you what to think, but to examine what these events reveal about something much deeper. Whether you supported the protesters, supported the government's response, or simply watched everything unfold. From a distance, there is a larger lesson that deserves our attention. The real story is not only about an examination, it is about trust. Once trust begins to fracture, every decision made by institutions is viewed through suspicion, and every action by citizens is interpreted through fear. That is a dangerous place for any democracy to reach, because rebuilding trust always takes far longer than losing it. Every generation has a defining moment that shapes how it understands power. For some generations, it was war. For others, it was economic collapse or social transformation. For today's students, one of those defining moments has been watching high-stakes examinations become surrounded by questions, investigations, cancellations, and public controversy. Even when corrective action is taken, many students carry something invisible long after the examination ends. They carry doubt. They begin asking themselves whether success depends entirely on preparation or whether unseen forces can influence outcomes in ways they cannot control. That uncertainty is psychologically exhausting because it replaces confidence with constant suspicion. Imagine preparing for years for a single examination that could determine your future. Every morning begins with books. Every evening ends with revision. Friendships become limited. Family celebrations become secondary. Sleep becomes optional. Mental health becomes fragile. Then imagine waking up to headlines suggesting that the integrity of the examination itself has been questioned. Regardless of where responsibility ultimately lies, the emotional impact on students is immediate. The investment of time, discipline, and hope suddenly feels vulnerable. That emotional reality cannot simply be dismissed because it leaves lasting scars on people who have done nothing wrong except believe the system would protect their efforts. One of the greatest mistakes societies make is assuming that young people only care about outcomes. They do not. They care equally about process. A student who narrowly misses admission can often accept disappointment if they genuinely believe the competition was fair. What becomes much harder to accept is the feeling that fairness itself may have been compromised. Human beings can tolerate failure surprisingly well when they perceive justice. They struggle far more when they perceive uncertainty. That is why transparent institutions matter. Transparency does not eliminate mistakes, but it allows people to believe mistakes are acknowledged rather than hidden. The conversations surrounding these protests have often become intensely political. Different groups have interpreted the same events in completely different ways. Some have argued that the demonstrations reflected legitimate frustration from students demanding accountability. Others have argued that political organizations attempted to influence or benefit from the movement. These competing narratives illustrate an important challenge in any democracy. Public debate is rarely about facts alone. It is also about interpretation, identity, and trust. When trust is already weak, people naturally interpret the same evidence through completely different lenses. Social media has made this even more complicated. Today, millions of people experience national events through edited clips, emotional captions, and algorithmically amplified opinions. A 15-second video rarely captures what happened before or after a confrontation. A dramatic photograph rarely explains the broader context. This does not mean every image is misleading, nor does it mean every official explanation is complete. It simply means that responsible citizens should develop the discipline to separate evidence from assumption and reporting from speculation. Democracies become healthier when citizens ask difficult questions of everyone, including governments, opposition parties, media organizations, and influential creators. One aspect that deserves thoughtful reflection is the relationship between protest and democratic participation. Peaceful protest has long been recognized as an important part of democratic societies. At the same time, governments also carry responsibilities for maintaining public order and protecting public safety. These responsibilities can sometimes come into tension, especially during large demonstrations involving thousands of people. That tension should never become an excuse for abandoning accountability on either side. Citizens have the right to question state actions, and public institutions have the responsibility to explain and justify those actions openly. Accountability is not a sign of weakness. It is one of democracy's greatest strengths. Something else concerns me even more than the immediate controversy. It is the emotional fatigue developing among young people. Increasingly, I meet students who no longer speak with excitement about building their future. Instead, they speak with exhaustion. They are tired before their careers have even begun. They compare themselves endlessly with others. They compete in educational systems that demand perfection. They fear unemployment before graduation. They watch technology transform industries faster than universities can adapt. Then, when public controversies emerge around examinations or recruitment processes, many begin wondering whether the rules themselves are stable. That combination creates a generation that is highly educated yet emotionally uncertain. As a counselor, I have learned that hopelessness rarely begins with dramatic events. It begins with repeated disappointments that gradually reshape expectations. A student who repeatedly feels unheard eventually stops speaking. A young professional whose efforts are repeatedly overlooked eventually stops believing improvement matters. A citizen who repeatedly feels institutions are distant eventually disengages from civic life altogether. None of these transitions happen overnight. They happen quietly, conversation by conversation, experience by experience, disappointment by disappointment. That is precisely why leadership matters. Leadership is not measured only by administrative efficiency or electoral success. It is measured by the ability to restore confidence during periods of uncertainty. Strong leadership acknowledges public anxiety instead of dismissing it. It communicates clearly instead of allowing rumors to fill information gaps. It welcomes scrutiny instead of fearing difficult questions. Citizens may disagree with decisions, but they are more likely to respect institutions that remain transparent throughout difficult moments. There is another lesson here that extends beyond governments. Universities, coaching institutes, media organizations, parents, and even content creators all shape the environment in which students think. If every conversation reduces students to political symbols, we fail them. They are not merely headlines or statistics. They are individuals carrying immense pressure, extraordinary aspirations, and genuine fears about the future. The responsibility to protect their confidence belongs to society as a whole, not only to one institution. Sometimes we mistakenly believe resilience means accepting everything silently. That is not resilience. Genuine resilience combines patience with critical thinking. It means asking difficult questions respectfully. It means demanding accountability without abandoning reason. It means refusing to spread misinformation simply because it supports our preferred narrative. Most importantly, it means recognizing that democracy is strengthened not by louder voices alone, but by more informed voices. If there is one idea I want you to carry into the next part of this conversation, it is this. The real crisis facing many societies today is not only political polarization or institutional controversy. It is the slow erosion of public trust. Once trust begins disappearing, every future decision becomes harder to accept, every reform becomes harder to implement, and every disagreement becomes more emotionally charged. Rebuilding trust requires honesty, competence, transparency, and a willingness to listen even when the conversation is uncomfortable. In the next part, I want to move beyond the headlines and explore the psychological consequences of these events. We will examine why institutions often underestimate the emotional impact of uncertainty, why young people increasingly feel disconnected from traditional systems, and what practical changes can help restore confidence before an entire generation begins believing that fairness is no longer worth expecting. Beyond the headlines, rebuilding trust before it is too late. If you have stayed with me until this point, I want you to pause and ask yourself a question that has nothing to do with politics. Think about the last time you lost trust in someone. Chances are it did not happen because of a single mistake. It happened because several unanswered questions slowly accumulated until doubt became stronger than confidence. Institutions work in much the same way. People can forgive errors, delays, and even poor decisions if they believe those responsible are acting honestly and are willing to correct their course. What becomes much harder to repair is the belief that ordinary people are not being heard. Whether we are discussing an examination, a public protest, or any national controversy, the underlying issue is often the same. Citizens want to know that their concerns matter before frustration hardens into alienation. One of the greatest misconceptions about young people is that they are impatient simply because they belong to a different generation. I do not think that is true. What I see instead is a generation that has been asked to carry extraordinary expectations while living in an environment of extraordinary uncertainty. Students are expected to achieve perfect academic results, develop multiple professional skills, compete globally, adapt to rapidly changing technology, and maintain emotional resilience all at the same time. Yet many of them feel that the systems they depend upon are struggling to keep pace with those expectations. When that gap widens, frustration becomes almost inevitable. We often speak about the importance of education, but we rarely speak about the psychological contract that education creates. A student accepts years of discipline because they believe that merit will be recognized. Families make enormous financial sacrifices because they believe education will open doors that previous generations never had. Teachers dedicate themselves to preparing students because they believe knowledge can transform lives. When that shared belief weakens, the consequences extend far beyond examination halls. The economy loses confidence, employers inherit a more anxious workforce, and society gradually becomes more cynical about the value of effort itself. This is why transparency should never be viewed as a public relations exercise. It is a public responsibility. Whenever serious questions arise around institutions, whether those questions concern examinations, recruitment, governance, or public administration, people deserve timely explanations supported by evidence. Silence often creates a vacuum that rumors quickly fill. Once rumors begin shaping public opinion, even accurate information struggles to regain credibility because trust has already been damaged. Communication cannot erase mistakes, but it can prevent uncertainty from becoming permanent. Another reality deserves our attention. Modern information ecosystems reward certainty far more than they reward accuracy. The loudest voices often receive the greatest visibility, even when the evidence remains incomplete. Social media encourages immediate conclusions, while truth frequently requires patience. As citizens, we must resist the temptation to accept every dramatic claim or every official statement without careful examination. Healthy skepticism is not the same as cynicism. Skepticism asks for evidence. Cynicism assumes dishonesty regardless of the facts. Democracies need more skeptical citizens, not more cynical ones. As someone who has spent time studying organizations and advising people through difficult decisions, I have noticed a pattern that appears repeatedly. Systems rarely fail because nobody recognizes the problem. They fail because acknowledging the problem becomes politically, socially, or institutionally uncomfortable. Every organization eventually reaches moments when protecting its reputation begins competing with protecting public confidence. The wiser path is almost always the second one. Institutions that admit shortcomings early often emerge stronger than those that spend years defending avoidable mistakes. The same principle applies to citizens. We should never confuse criticism with hostility. A mature democracy depends upon constructive criticism because criticism identifies weaknesses before they become crises. At the same time, criticism also carries responsibilities. It should be grounded in evidence rather than outrage. It should seek solutions rather than permanent division. It should challenge institutions while recognizing that democratic institutions remain essential to national stability. Accountability and stability are not opposing values. They reinforce one another when pursued responsibly. Let us also talk about something that receives far less attention than it deserves. Mental exhaustion among students is becoming a silent public health issue. Many young people appear successful on paper while privately struggling with anxiety, burnout, loneliness, and fear of a failure. Public controversies surrounding examinations or recruitment processes do not create these emotions from nothing, but they can intensify feelings that already exist. A student who has spent years preparing for a single opportunity does not simply process news intellectually, they process it emotionally because their identity has become deeply connected to that goal. Parents also deserve recognition in this conversation. Behind almost every student is a family making difficult compromises. Some parents relocate to different cities. Others borrow money for coaching and accommodation. Many postpone personal dreams so their children can pursue professional ambitions. Their hopes become intertwined with the aspirations of their children. When uncertainty surrounds important educational milestones, entire families experience the emotional consequences together. This reminds us that educational integrity is not merely an administrative issue, it is a social responsibility affecting millions of households. I also want to speak directly to those listening who may feel powerless. It is easy to believe that ordinary citizens cannot influence institutions, but history repeatedly demonstrates otherwise. Meaningful change often begins with informed communities that remain engaged instead of withdrawing in frustration. Participate in public discussions respectfully. Read beyond headlines. Verify information before sharing it. Support organizations and initiatives that strengthen transparency and educational integrity. Encourage young people to ask thoughtful questions rather than rewarding blind agreement. Small civic habits repeated by millions of people gradually shape stronger democracies. There is another lesson that professionals should consider. Employers frequently complain that graduates lack confidence, initiative, or resilience. Yet, confidence cannot be demanded in the workplace if uncertainty dominates the educational journey leading there. Organizations should invest not only in technical training but also in environments where fairness, feedback, and transparent decision making become everyday realities. Young professionals rebuild trust through consistent experiences of justice, not through motivational speeches. As researchers, educators, policymakers, journalists, and citizens, we should all resist the temptation to reduce complex national conversations into battles between heroes and villains. Reality is rarely that simple. Institutions consist of individuals making difficult decisions under pressure. Protest movements consist of diverse people with different motivations. Media organizations contain both excellent reporting and avoidable shortcomings. Responsible public discourse begins by accepting complexity instead of searching for comforting simplicity. If there is one lasting lesson I hope you take from today's conversation, it is this. A nation becomes stronger not merely when it builds better roads, larger universities, or faster technology. It becomes stronger when its people believe that fairness remains worth defending. Trust is one of the few national assets that cannot be manufactured overnight. It is earned through consistent actions, transparent institutions, accountable leadership, and citizens who remain informed rather than indifferent. The future of India will not be determined by one examination, one protest, one resignation, or one political cycle. It will be determined by whether we create institutions capable of learning from moments of public distrust instead of simply surviving them. Every controversy presents two possibilities. One path deepens division and normalizes suspicion. The other encourages reform, strengthens accountability, and restores confidence. The direction we choose today will influence generations that have not yet entered a classroom. Before I leave you, I want you to remember something that has guided much of my own work. Progress is not measured only by how loudly a nation celebrates its achievements. It is also measured by how honestly it confronts its shortcomings. Real patriotism is not blind agreement, and it is not permanent outrage. Real patriotism is the willingness to improve the institutions that shape the lives of millions of people, even when those conversations are uncomfortable. This has been the IPN Gate Podcast. My hope is not that you leave this episode agreeing with every opinion I have shared. My hope is that you leave asking better questions than you were asking before, because the quality of a democracy ultimately depends on the quality of the questions its citizens are willing to ask, the evidence they are willing to examine, and the responsibility they accept in shaping the future they hope to inherit.